get to a certain place of well-being for a long enough time, you start to believe that you've got that, like that you're entitled to it. You know, that like it's automatic, and you forget what brought you there, and you forget that the thing that brought you there still requires devotion and attention and patience and faith towards that. And but I think an even better way of really treating the practice is understanding that growth is indefinite, and that you're always a beginner and there's always more. And it's important to understand that.
Right, which
that
is
fuels you. That, you know. Yeah.
Which will be difficult to remember if your ego is very strong, particularly if you have built up insecurities that have been left unresolved. You're going to interpret a lot of your, if you want to call them accomplishments, according to those insecurities, because your whole life you've been trying to compensate for those insecurities for a very long time. Everybody has been playing the same game. It's a game that without even knowing it, you're playing this game, that you have these impressions that are there. They're always a nuisance in your mind, unresolved stuff which one doesn't have either the awareness or the courage to confront directly, so they keep on haunting your mind like ghosts. And then one day when one is a little bit wiser, one realizes that most of the way that one is operating through life has been through fear. More than 99% has all been fear. So if this is one's way of operating in the world, then your ego is always very quick when something happens which compensates for these insecurities. It's very quick to create a trophy for itself and say, yes, I did it. And then you start to become competitive with others, and this conditioning of the society certainly doesn't help. We've been trained from very young age to be competitive, because
and the funniest part about that is that if you can rise above that, it demarks you from your competition, and you end up
Yes.
if people that are competitive would just realize that if they were not competitive anymore, they would rise above the competition. Like, it's so ironic that to rise above the competition, you
because
stop being competitive.
here's what is interesting: only things that belong within the same category very easily can be said to be competitive with one another.
Right.
Whereas if you stand as a category onto yourself, what competition is there? Other people will will be trying to compete against you. But because you found your own voice, that's the thing, to discover your own voice. People, when they are competing, they're doing it out of imitation, not because they've discovered their own voice. And that's something you can never imitate. I can never imitate your voice. You can never imitate my voice. Our inner voices, when we're truly tapped in to our unexplored potentials, are distinctly unique. Just our very programming of the body has subtleties which cannot be imitated. And it's those subtleties which make all of the difference. This is important to understand about subtleties. It's always the subtleties which make the whole difference. Constants actually don't make much difference in your life, because they're constant. They're almost like graveyards. Just look at your personality today, how much it has evolved from the time when you were, let's say, 4 years old. Right? How did you become like this? First, when you were very young, there were certain constants, and you know that scientifically. We have about you can say 50,000 thoughts per day. 90% of them are exactly the same the next day. So that leaves only about 10% where certain new possibilities are happening. This is very common, that has been happening throughout life. So what that means is that every 24 hours you're repeating the same tendencies and patterns. However, even if you're not practicing yoga, even without any spiritual discipline, there is that 10% where there are fluctuations, deviations from the normal course of things. So 124 hours, that 10%, there's some fluctuations. The next day, and a new collection of fluctuations, and the same the next day and the next day and the next day. So over time, even though you do not see it in the meantime, in the long term, all these minor fluctuations lead to a mountain of difference. Right? And that's how today you're a completely different person than who you were when you were, let's say, 10 years of age or 4 years of age. It's because of those minor fluctuations. So spiritual process, it will work in exactly the same way. You will have constants. Let's say the constants are stress, anxiety, fear, uncertainties, lack of restfulness, lack of balance, stuff that you've known already for a long time. But one day in the meditation, a moment of peace, a moment of silence, that's a fluctuation. It's outside of the circle of your normal everyday experience. And if you experience it once, that increases the likelihood that you will experience it again in the future. That's just the mathematics of it. Next day, maybe nothing happens. Next day, oh, you're also relaxed, but instead of being for 2 seconds, you relax, let's say for 5 seconds, but 5 seconds of silence. Oh, a new fluctuation. And the mind remembers it. The body remembers it. Keep practicing that way and you'll find these fluctuations start to become more frequent. And then, after a while, what happens? These qualities which once were so rare, today they become automatic. When you think back, you cannot even imagine, oh, I used to live life this way. Now it's so much an ordinary part of your everyday experience that you do not even think about it. It's just second nature to you. So something like freedom, you'll be the least, I assure you, the least thing that you'll ever be interested in is freedom and happiness. Because they're such a common part of your everyday life that it goes without saying. They're taken for granted. But only one who is in misery thinks about happiness. Only one who is a slave thinks about freedom.